still remember the first time I realized something wasn't right. It was a quiet evening at home, the kind where the house feels too still, almost holding its breath. Dad was upstairs in his study, and I was in the living room scrolling through my phone, pretending to focus on something mundane. That's when I overheard it, her voice. My stepmom, the woman who had married Dad only a year ago, talking on the phone in hushed tones, but sharp enough for me to catch the words. "It's all mine soon. He won't see it coming." My stomach sank. I paused, frozen, trying to process what I had just heard. At first, I thought I must have misheard her. Surely, she wouldn't be so bold. But something in her tone, the confidence dripping from every word, told me otherwise. She believed she could manipulate Dad, take control of the estate, and leave me with nothing. The realization hit me harder than I expected. Betrayal doesn't always announce itself. It creeps in quietly, dressed as charm and polite smiles. I spent the rest of the evening replaying the conversation in my mind, trying to make sense of it. Dad had always trusted her completely, and she had learned how to present herself as the perfect wife, the caring companion. But now, I saw the cracks beneath the surface. The greed, the scheming, the way she had positioned herself to gain everything without earning it. I couldn't confront her yet, I had no proof. Confrontation without strategy would only alert her. I needed patience, observation, and a plan. As the days passed, I watched carefully. Every interaction, every suggestion she made, every subtle comment about money or Dad's will was cataloged in my mind. She was skilled, smiling when Dad looked, whispering manipulations when he didn't. She flattered him, distracted him, and planted tiny seeds of doubt, all while pretending to be the devoted wife. But I wasn't blind. I had learned to read people, to notice patterns, and I could see her ambition clearly. Dad, completely unaware of what was happening behind his back, continued his routines. He confided in her, shared plans, and even mentioned parts of his estate he hadn't told anyone else. Each word, each trust, was like fuel for her scheme, and the thought made my blood boil. But I stayed quiet. I had learned long ago that anger, no matter how justified, is useless without action. You have to wait, watch, and strike when the moment is right. Every night, I replayed scenarios in my head. What if I gathered evidence? What if I confronted her too early? The risk was real. If Dad ever suspected I was watching or doubting her, she would spin him against me. That was the cruel skill of manipulators. They create doubt and confusion, and they thrive in secrecy. I reminded myself that my goal wasn't revenge in the moment. It was justice, protection, and ultimately ensuring Dad's final wishes were honored. One evening, the tension reached a new level. Dad called me into the study, smiling as he showed me a document he had signed, a partial outline of his estate. I nodded politely, careful to hide the suspicion burning inside me. She was in the other room, casually sipping tea, pretending innocence. But I knew better. Every glance, every word she exchanged with Dad was calculated. And now, I had a clearer picture of just how much she was planning to take. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the situation. It wasn't just money. It was trust, loyalty, and family. My stepmom's betrayal wasn't merely financial, it was personal. She had positioned herself to control everything Dad had worked for, and worse, she wanted to rewrite our family story in her favor. I realized then that patience was my greatest weapon. The quiet observation, the waiting, and the careful gathering of proof were all part of a plan that would unfold when the time was right. By the end of that week, I made a silent promise to myself and to Dad. Even though he didn't know it yet, I would protect him, honor his trust, and ensure that the truth came to light. I didn't know exactly how it would happen, but I was determined to watch, to wait, and to act with precision. The storm of deception had begun, and I was ready to navigate it with careful strategy, unwavering focus, and a resolve that no manipulation could shake. It was in that quiet, tense observation that I realized something else. The most powerful moments don't come from confrontation or anger. They come from clarity, timing, and patience. And as I drifted to sleep that night, I knew the path ahead would be challenging, but the outcome would be worth every sleepless hour. To understand the tension that had taken root in our household, you need to know the story leading up to it. My dad, a hardworking man who built everything he had from the ground up, had always been a provider, not just for me, but for anyone he cared about. He had a simple philosophy: work hard, treat people fairly, and always do right by your family. When he met her, my stepmom, I didn't think much of it at first. She was charming, polished, and seemed genuinely interested in his life. But charm can hide 1,000 intentions, and it wasn't long before her real motives began to reveal themselves, quietly but unmistakably. Dad had always been cautious with his estate. He didn't flaunt wealth, But over the years he had accumulated savings, property, and investments that were meant to provide security for our family. I had grown up aware of the basics. There were a few houses, some financial accounts, and retirement funds. But the full scope wasn't something he discussed openly, and that was understandable. Money has a way of changing people, and Dad wanted to protect what he had built without creating unnecessary tension. When she entered our lives, things shifted subtly. At first, the changes were barely noticeable, a casual suggestion here, a small nudge there. She began influencing Dad's decisions, encouraging him to consider modern approaches to handling his assets, framing everything as advice and concern for his well-being. But behind the veneer of care was a calculated effort to place herself in control. She knew the estate, she knew the accounts, and she knew the people around us well enough to manipulate them to her advantage. I watched as she worked her charm on everyone else too. Family, friends, even neighbors. To them, she was the ideal new wife, caring and attentive, someone who brought positivity into Dad's life. But I had a front row seat to the truth. Behind closed doors, I saw the moments that didn't match her public persona, subtle impatience with Dad's questions, thinly veiled frustration when he consulted me about decisions, and the occasional flicker of greed in her eyes when the subject of inheritance came up. At home, the dynamic changed quickly. Dad's confidence in his decision-making began to shift. He trusted her, perhaps too much, and allowed her influence to guide his actions in ways I didn't entirely agree with. She introduced new ideas about joint decisions, modern family agreements, and preparing for the future. But I could see the manipulation threaded through every suggestion. Her plan was meticulous. She was positioning herself to benefit fully from Dad's estate while keeping her intentions hidden until the right moment. I wasn't naive. I had grown up observing people closely, learning to read tone, body language, and subtle cues that often go unnoticed. Step by step, I began piecing together the patterns. Her late-night phone calls, her careful monitoring of Dad's meetings, her insistence on knowing about all family decisions. These weren't coincidences. They were deliberate moves, a strategy designed to give her the upper hand. Every small detail mattered, and I cataloged them all silently, knowing that confrontation too soon could ruin everything. Meanwhile, Dad continued his life, blissfully unaware of the brewing storm. He would talk about the future in calm, optimistic terms. Plans for the house, ideas for investments, even dreams of trips he wanted to take with the family. Each word he spoke was a reminder of how much I had to protect, not just the estate, but the man who had devoted his life to building a secure, loving home. Step by step, I realized that my role was not only to observe, but also to act as the silent guardian, ensuring that his trust wasn't exploited. The tension within our family wasn't obvious to outsiders. To neighbors, friends, and extended family, everything seemed perfectly normal. But I could feel it. A quiet undercurrent of manipulation and strategy that I had to navigate carefully. I couldn't let my emotions betray me. Anger, suspicion, or rash action would give her exactly the leverage she needed. Instead, I focused on gathering information, observing patterns, and preparing for the moment when the truth would be revealed. During this time, I also reflected on our past. My relationship with Dad had always been strong, built on trust and shared experiences. That bond gave me both insight and courage. I knew him better than anyone else in the house, knew what he valued, and understood the way he approached decisions. That insight became my guide, helping me anticipate her moves, predict her manipulations, and prepare counter strategies that would ensure justice without jeopardizing our family's trust. Even small incidents began to reveal the depths of her ambition. A casual remark about handling the estate. During a dinner, a question about who would manage Dad's accounts if something happened. Each moment was a clue. She tested boundaries, gauged reactions, and adapted her strategy accordingly. But I stayed patient, documenting each act silently in my mind, watching for the patterns that would later confirm my suspicions beyond doubt. At the same time, I had to maintain a delicate balance with my own emotions. It was painful to see Dad, someone I loved and respected, unknowingly guided by someone who didn't have his best interests at heart. Yet I knew that emotional outbursts or premature confrontation would only empower her. Patience was critical. Watching quietly, learning, and waiting for the right moment was the only way to ensure that her plans would ultimately fail. By the time the stakes had fully revealed themselves, I had a clear picture of her intentions. Every act, every word, every subtle manipulation fit together into a pattern that could no longer be ignored. She believed she was in control, that she had everyone fooled, and that the inheritance was hers for the taking. But I had been watching, strategizing, and preparing. I wasn't going to let her succeed. Not at the expense of my father's trust, our family, or my own sense of justice. It was in this quiet observation and strategic patience that I realized the true nature of the challenge. This wasn't just about money. It was about integrity, loyalty, and protecting those who cannot always see the betrayal coming. Step by step, I positioned myself to act at the perfect moment, ensuring that when the time came, her plan would unravel in a way that left no doubt about who truly valued family, trust, and respect. Every day that passed, the tension built. The quiet moments, the seemingly mundane family interactions were all part of the unfolding drama. I listened, I observed, and I prepared. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that the moment of truth, the will reading, would reveal everything. The betrayal, the greed, the arrogance, and ultimately, the justice that was coming for her. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the house grew almost unbearable. Step by step, I started noticing the subtleties in my stepmom's actions that I had overlooked at first. She wasn't just passively waiting for Dad's estate to be hers. She was actively shaping circumstances to her advantage. I could see it in the way she managed conversations, the sly compliments designed to earn Dad's trust, and the way she subtly isolated me from discussions about family finances. It wasn't blatant at first, nothing that could be used as proof. But there were moments, glances exchanged with Dad that lingered too long, offhand remarks that seemed innocent but hinted at strategy, a certain satisfaction in her tone when talking about future planning. That spoke volumes to me. I began to record these observations in my mind, analyzing each phrase, each hesitation, each micro-expression. Patience was still my weapon. Acting too early could backfire spectacularly. I started noticing that she had friends in positions I hadn't considered, lawyers, accountants, even distant relatives who could be persuaded to support her narrative. Her network was wider than I imagined. It was both impressive and terrifying, knowing how meticulously she orchestrated appearances. But she underestimated one thing: I had time on my side, and I was determined to watch, learn, and act with precision. There were nights when I couldn't sleep, haunted by the tension in the household. I'd replay moments in my head, Dad's unquestioning trust, her polished words, the way she made even simple conversations feel loaded with hidden meaning. I started documenting everything mentally, creating timelines of actions, cross-referencing conversations, noting inconsistencies. Each day, the puzzle became clearer. Her plan wasn't just to influence Dad. It was to erase my place in the inheritance entirely. One afternoon, she attempted to manipulate a small but telling decision. Dad had mentioned an investment he wanted to make with part of his savings. She intervened casually, suggesting alternative uses for the funds, framing it as concern for the family's long-term stability. Her tone was soft, persuasive, and confident. To Dad, it seemed like a reasonable suggestion. To me, it was another thread in the web she was spinning, a subtle effort to shift control and reshape the estate in her favor. It became harder to conceal my awareness. Step by step, I learned to maintain calm in her presence while probing quietly for more information. I began asking casual questions, observing her reactions, and noticing the tiniest slips, hesitations, changes in tone, fleeting expressions of frustration or irritation when I questioned her decisions. Every small detail confirmed what I had already suspected. Her plan was deliberate, calculated, and driven by ambition rather than care. I started confiding in a few trusted friends, those who knew my father and me well. We discussed the signs, the subtle moves, and the potential consequences if no one intervened. Each conversation reinforced my strategy: patience, observation, and strategic action. Revenge or confrontation too soon would only alert her, and I had no intention of giving her the upper hand. I had to wait for the perfect moment, the will reading, the stage where her scheme would meet its ultimate obstacle. But the tension wasn't just strategic, it was deeply emotional. Watching someone I considered part of the family attempt to undermine everything Dad had built, everything I had grown up with, was painful. The betrayal cut deep. Step by step, I realized that anger alone wasn't enough. I had to transform that emotion into clarity, into a calm determination that would guide every action. She was clever, but I had something she didn't: insight, foresight, and the unshakable bond I shared with my father. There were moments when she tried to test me directly. A subtle comment about my understanding of finances, a question about how I would react if Dad made certain decisions, all designed to gauge my awareness, to intimidate me, to create doubt. But I met each test quietly, without reaction, allowing her to believe she had control, while I continued building my understanding, my strategy, my mental map of every possible outcome. The psychological pressure in the house was palpable. Dad remained oblivious, trusting her completely, which only heightened the stakes. I realized that the longer this played out, the more tension there would be on the day of the will reading. Every interaction, every small act of manipulation, would add to the eventual shock when the truth came to light. I had to be ready, mentally and emotionally, to navigate that climax without losing composure. It wasn't only her tactics that raised the stakes. It was the fear of underestimating her. I knew she was capable of subtle sabotage, legal maneuvers, influencing advisors, even fabricating minor details to sway opinions. My observations became almost obsessive, cataloging every interaction, anticipating every possible move. I had to ensure that when the moment came, the evidence, the clarity, and the truth aligned perfectly. Even as I watched, my father remained blissfully unaware, speaking about future plans, retirement, and investments as though nothing was amiss. That contrast, the calm innocence of my dad against the quiet scheming of my stepmom, made the tension unbearable. Step by step, I realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a family dispute over money. It was a test of loyalty, insight, and strategic thinking. Then came the moment that confirmed everything. I stumbled across a document, slightly misplaced, but revealing enough. A draft will, annotated notes, suggestions for asset redirection, all pointing clearly to her plan to take the majority of Dad's estate. My heart raced, not with anger, but with clarity. The game was real, the stakes were higher than I had imagined, and now I had proof. The pieces I had been gathering, observing, and cataloging were now forming a complete picture. Her ambition, cunning, and overconfidence had finally given me the leverage I needed. From that day on, the tension became a careful dance. She continued to manipulate, unaware that I now knew her plan in detail. Every conversation, every meeting, every casual suggestion she made was met with quiet analysis. I prepared myself for the moment of revelation, imagining the day of the will reading, envisioning how the layers of her deception would finally unravel. The rising conflict wasn't just external, it was deeply internal. I wrestled with anger, frustration, and the fear of Dad's trust being exploited. Yet each time I considered acting prematurely, I reminded myself patience is power. Observation is strength, and perfect timing, is everything. By the end of that period, I had developed an intimate understanding of her strategy, a map of her intentions, and a mental plan for the ultimate reveal. The tension in the house reached a boiling point, but I remained composed, quietly preparing to protect my father, preserve justice, and ensure that the betrayal would not go unpunished. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the drama was about to reach its climax. The moment of clarity came quietly, almost unexpectedly, yet it hit me with the force of a storm. I had spent weeks observing, listening, and mentally cataloging every subtle move she made. I knew Stepmom's plan now, in all its arrogant detail. The evidence was unmistakable, a combination of documents, whispered conversations I'd overheard, and the subtle manipulations she thought I hadn't noticed. It was a blueprint for betrayal, and it was designed to leave me out entirely, to erase my place in the life my father had built. I remember the first time I confronted myself with the full reality of it. My heart pounded, but anger wasn't my primary reaction. Instead, a strange clarity took over. I realized that this wasn't just about money or possessions. It was about loyalty, trust, and the values Dad had instilled in me. She had underestimated me, assumed my silence meant ignorance, and believed she could manipulate both of us without consequence. That assumption would soon prove her undoing. From that point on, every interaction became a delicate game of chess. She would drop comments about Dad's wishes, casually implying that her influence was beneficial, while I remained outwardly calm, nodding, asking innocent questions, but always storing every nuance in my mind. Her confidence, which had been a weapon against anyone less observant, began to feel like vulnerability in my eyes. She believed she was untouchable, but the foundation of her plan had cracks I intended to expose. One evening, I found a file she had carelessly left open on Dad's desk, a folder of correspondence with financial advisors, hints at changes to the will, and suggestions that would have redirected nearly everything to her name. My pulse quickened, but I stayed composed. This was the moment that confirmed everything I had suspected. Every late-night phone call, every sly remark, every manipulative gesture now made perfect sense. She had been orchestrating a takeover, and I had the evidence she thought I'd never find. The emotional weight of it was intense. I felt betrayal, disappointment, and a deep sadness for Dad, who trusted her completely. But alongside those feelings, a determination formed. I couldn't let this stand. Justice needed to be served, but not through anger or confrontation. That would be too obvious, too easy for her to deflect. No, the timing had to be perfect. Patience had to guide my every move. Every small action she had taken would become part of the revelation. each piece falling into place when the moment was right. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in her behavior. Perhaps she sensed something, though she couldn't name it. There were fleeting moments of tension when she thought I wasn't paying attention. A slight hesitation, a brief flicker of uncertainty, but she quickly masked it with her usual charm. I used these moments to refine my strategy, to anticipate her next moves, and to prepare for the ultimate confrontation without revealing my knowledge prematurely. The household itself became a pressure cooker. Dad remained unaware of the looming danger, continuing his routines, sharing plans and investments as though nothing was amiss. My stepmom's manipulations intensified, growing bolder and more confident. But I had the advantage now: awareness. Every plan she made, every attempt to control the narrative, was known to me. I could anticipate her moves, counteract them in subtle ways, and ensure that when the day of the will arrived, her arrogance would collapse under its own weight. There were nights when I would replay the events in my head, imagining every possible scenario. What if she tried to confront me before the will reading? What if she went to Dad with false accusations? Each possibility was considered and prepared for. My emotional control became crucial. I had to appear calm, unaware, and respectful while internally navigating the complex web of deceit she had spun. Then came the turning point that shifted the entire dynamic. I overheard her speaking to one of Dad's advisors, casually suggesting revisions to the estate that would eliminate my share entirely. She laughed softly, confident that no one could stop her. I listened silently, my mind racing. It was audacious, reckless even. In that moment, I realized that she had crossed a line. Her overconfidence had made her vulnerable. The timing was nearly perfect. The climax I had envisioned for weeks was approaching. Emotionally, it was exhausting. I wrestled with anger, frustration, and a sense of protectiveness toward Dad. But I also felt an unexpected clarity and calm. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It was about justice, about ensuring that truth and loyalty triumphed over greed and deceit. The emotional peak of this conflict wasn't found in confrontation. It was in preparation, awareness, and the strategic patience that would allow the truth to shine when the world was watching. Step by step, I positioned myself, subtly influencing minor decisions without drawing attention. I asked questions that seemed casual but gave me further insight. I noted every hesitation, every slip of confidence, every attempt to manipulate. Each moment brought me closer to the day of revelation, the will reading, where all of her schemes would be laid bare, and justice would be undeniable. I realized that the turning point wasn't just the discovery of her plan. It was the shift in my own mindset. I was no longer reacting emotionally to the betrayal. I was responding strategically, using patience, observation, and timing to ensure that the outcome would favor truth and fairness. That emotional evolution, moving from shock and anger to composed determination, was as critical as the evidence itself. As the days passed, the tension became almost unbearable. Every interaction, every family dinner, every casual conversation was charged with hidden meaning. I watched her closely, noting every micro-expression, every subtle attempt to manipulate the narrative, and with each observation, my plan solidified. I would not act prematurely. I would wait for the perfect moment to reveal the truth, to protect my father, and to ensure that her arrogance and deceit unraveled spectacularly in front of everyone. The emotional peak of this chapter was a mix of fear, anticipation, and determination. I felt the weight of responsibility, not just to myself or my inheritance, but to my father, whose trust she sought to exploit. I knew that one wrong move could tip the scales, that acting too soon or too late could jeopardize everything. But I also knew that I had the advantage of awareness, strategy, and unwavering focus. In that moment, I understood something critical: true victory doesn't come from anger or impulsive action. It comes from patience, clarity, and the courage to wait for the right moment. I had learned to see through deception, anticipate manipulation, and hold my own in a game where every word, glance, and gesture mattered. And now, standing on the edge of confrontation, I was ready. The stage was set. Every thread of deceit, every subtle manipulation, and every act of greed had been documented, studied, and prepared for. The climax, the moment of truth, was drawing near, and I was ready to ensure that justice, loyalty, and truth prevailed over manipulation and betrayal. The day of the will reading arrived with a quiet intensity that I could feel from the moment I woke up. The air seemed heavier than usual, almost charged, as though the house itself anticipated the confrontation that was about to unfold. Family members trickled in one by one, each exchanging polite greetings that carried subtle undercurrents of tension. Step by step, the dynamics I had observed for weeks, the careful smiles, the restrained body language, the underlying anxiety, were all on full display. My stepmom entered with her usual confident poise, smiling at Dad as though nothing had ever been amiss. Her eyes briefly met mine, and I noticed a flicker of something she quickly masked. Overconfidence, perhaps, or a subconscious acknowledgement that her plan was reaching its critical point. Either way, I didn't react. I remained calm, composed, and observant, my mind cataloging every detail, every nuance, every potential slip. The lawyer arrived, carrying a neatly stacked set of documents that would determine the fate of our family's estate. I could feel the subtle tension in the room, the unspoken anticipation of what was to come. Dad sat at the head of the table, his expression calm but proud, unaware of the web of deceit that had been spun around him. My stepmom leaned slightly forward, prepared to react to every announcement, her confidence almost palpable. But I knew the truth. I had watched, listened, and waited. The moment of reckoning was about to arrive. The lawyer began with the formalities, reading minor bequests and smaller arrangements first. Candlesticks, furniture, personal items. Things that carried sentimental value but weren't central to the estate. My stepmom's reactions were measured, maintaining composure while keeping a careful eye on Dad's expressions. I noticed the tiny shifts. Her shoulders tensing slightly when she thought no one was looking, her gaze flickering toward me as if testing my knowledge. I remained outwardly neutral, giving nothing away, all while internally preparing for the pivotal moment. Finally, the lawyer paused, and with deliberate slowness opened the section concerning the major assets, the properties, the financial accounts, and the distributions that would determine the future of our family legacy. My stepmom's eyes widened imperceptibly, a flicker of triumph crossing her face as she assumed the next moments would favor her. But I had ensured that she had no idea what was coming. I had watched, waited, and understood every move she had made. Her confidence was about to crumble. The first major bequest was read aloud, directed to a trusted family member outside her influence. I watched her reactions carefully as the lawyer moved through several allocations, each one subtly undermining her expectation that she would control the majority of Dad's estate. Her composure began to falter just slightly, a tiny crack in her carefully constructed armor. Dad remained unaware, smiling and nodding at the recipients as though all was natural, but I could sense the shift in the room. The quiet realization that things were not unfolding according to her plan. Then came the pivotal moment, the portion of the estate that she had expected to claim. The lawyer cleared his throat, and a hush fell over the room. Everyone leaned in slightly, sensing the weight of what was about to be revealed. To my son, the lawyer began, reading Dad's carefully prepared words. I leave the majority of my estate, including all properties and financial accounts, to be managed in full by him with the understanding that the integrity, loyalty, and care of our family are paramount. Her face froze, a mixture of shock and disbelief crossing features that had previously radiated confidence. She opened her mouth, perhaps to interject or protest, but no words came. Her plan, meticulously crafted over months of manipulation and deceit, had collapsed in an instant. The room was silent except for the lawyer's steady voice, delivering the final instructions, each word driving home the point her ambition had been anticipated and neutralized. I could feel the tension release slowly, like the deflation of a balloon, as the lawyer continued. Any attempts to manipulate or control the estate outside of these instructions are strictly prohibited and will be legally challenged. The integrity of this distribution is non-negotiable, and all decisions must honor the intentions expressed here today. My stepmom's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but the subtle glances from family members confirmed what I already knew: her influence was gone. She was isolated, exposed, and powerless. I felt a strange mix of relief and vindication. Relief for Dad, whose trust had remained intact despite the undercurrents of betrayal, and vindication for myself, knowing that patience, observation, and strategic thinking had ensured the outcome. The weight of weeks of tension, planning, and emotional strain lifted slightly, replaced by the satisfaction of justice delivered. My stepmom sat back, defeated, as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Even as the lawyer continued to read, I could see her trying to process the reality that her overconfidence had betrayed her. She had underestimated the quiet vigilance of someone who cared deeply for the family, and who had the patience to wait for the perfect moment. Step by step, her plan unraveled before everyone's eyes, and the truth, the loyalty, integrity, and careful observation that had guided me, shone through unmistakably. When the final words of the will were read, I felt an almost overwhelming sense of closure. Dad's wishes had been honored, the estate secured, and the betrayal fully exposed. My stepmom remained seated, her expression a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief, while the rest of the family processed the turn of events. I felt the weight of months of tension and planning finally lift, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment and emotional clarity. As the room slowly dispersed, I lingered for a moment, observing the aftermath. The shock on my stepmom's face was palpable, but more importantly, I saw the relief and gratitude in Dad's eyes. The estate, the family legacy, and the values he had instilled were intact. Every small action, every patient observation, every careful step I had taken had led to this precise moment. The climax was not just about the revelation of her failed plan. It was about the triumph of loyalty, integrity, and quiet determination over manipulation and greed. That day, I learned something profound. True power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it is quiet, patient, and methodical, unfolding precisely when it must. By the end of the will reading, the tension had dissipated, the betrayal was revealed, and justice had been delivered in the way only careful planning and unwavering focus can achieve. It was a lesson I would carry with me forever, and a turning point in my understanding of family, loyalty, and the strength of patience when confronting deception. After the will reading, the house finally seemed to exhale. The tension that had gripped every corner, every room, for weeks now began to dissolve, leaving space for reflection, emotion, and clarity. Watching my stepmom sit in stunned silence, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sorrow, and triumph. Relief because Dad's wishes were honored, sorrow because the betrayal was so deep, and triumph because patience, observation, and quiet strategy had won the day. Dad turned to me after the lawyer had finished reading the final provisions. His eyes, normally calm and steady, were brimming with gratitude. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the vigilance I had maintained throughout this ordeal. No words were necessary. In that moment, I realized the true value of loyalty and protection. It isn't always loud or dramatic. It can be quiet, unseen, and patient, yet profoundly impactful. I looked around the room at family members, observing the subtle shifts in their expressions. Relief mingled with awkwardness, a shared understanding that the drama had reached its apex. The lesson was visible on every face. Deception can be intricate, but truth has a way of revealing itself when the right moment arrives. I also noticed my stepmom, still processing the collapse of her plans, the realization that manipulation and greed could not succeed against insight, patience, and love for family. In the days following the will reading, I found myself reflecting on everything that had transpired. The emotional weight of betrayal, the strategy of careful observation, the patience required to wait for the perfect moment. Each component had played a critical role in the outcome. And yet, the resolution wasn't simply about exposing wrongdoing. It was about preserving what mattered most: the family's trust, integrity, and future. Dad, of course, had his own reflections. He admitted that he had been blindsided by my stepmom's intentions, a confession that stung, but also reminded me that even the wisest can be deceived when someone hides their true motives behind charm and confidence. Yet his gratitude was profound, and he expressed pride in the way I had handled the situation. "You protected us," he said, quietly, "without ever letting anger or impatience dictate your actions. That's something remarkable." His words stayed with me, reinforcing the importance of combining emotional control with strategic thinking. The emotional resonance of this experience extended beyond the immediate family. I began to see patterns in other relationships, how subtle manipulation can creep in, how trust can be tested, and how patience and insight can serve as the ultimate defense. This was more than a personal victory. It was a lesson in human behavior, a blueprint for understanding the dynamics of loyalty, influence, and betrayal in any context. In reflecting on the resolution, I also considered the moral lesson. Revenge in its raw form, acting on anger, seeking retribution impulsively, often leads to more chaos than clarity. True resolution, as I had discovered, comes from preparation, observation, and timing. Justice doesn't always need to be loud. It can be quiet, methodical, and undeniable when revealed at the right moment. Acting with wisdom rather than emotion allowed me to preserve the relationships that mattered and ensure that deceit was exposed in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. I also took time to reconnect with Dad, to restore the calm and trust in our household. Together, we revisited the estate plans, discussed long-term strategies, and strengthened the family bonds that had been tested. There was an unspoken understanding between us that the ordeal had reinforced vigilance, honesty, and loyalty are not just virtues. They are the foundation of any strong family. I realized that the ordeal had transformed me, sharpening my awareness, strengthening my resolve, and deepening my appreciation for the trust my father had placed in me. The experience left me with practical advice for anyone who might face similar challenges. First, never underestimate the importance of observation. Subtle cues, minor slips, and inconsistencies often reveal more than words ever could. Second, patience is a form of power. Waiting for the right moment to act ensures that your actions are not reactive but decisive and effective. Third, emotional control is crucial. Anger, frustration, or impulsiveness can cloud judgment and give manipulators the advantage. Finally, document and prepare. Knowledge is power, but strategy turns knowledge into action. As I reflected on the emotional journey, I realized that the climax was not only in the revelation of the will, but also in the internal transformation it produced. I had grown in patience, emotional intelligence, and strategic thinking. The experience reinforced that life's challenges often require a combination of insight, restraint, and courage. Facing deceit, betrayal, and manipulation doesn't just test your awareness. It shapes your character and strengthens your resolve. Looking back, I also recognized the importance of communication and support. While I had acted largely on my own observations, the silent guidance and understanding I received from Dad, along with the lessons learned from past experiences, provided a foundation for making thoughtful, measured decisions. It reminded me that even in moments of conflict, connection, trust, and understanding are critical to navigating complex emotional landscapes. As the dust settled, the household returned to a sense of calm, but the lessons lingered. I had witnessed firsthand how greed and deception can disrupt lives, how appearances can be deceiving, and how vigilance, strategy, and patience can restore balance. My stepmom's failure was not just a victory for me. It was a vindication of careful observation, thoughtful action, and unwavering loyalty. The experience became a story I would carry forward, a reminder that justice, when guided by wisdom and integrity, is both powerful and lasting. Finally, I addressed the audience, sharing the core takeaways: protect what matters to you, observe before acting, and never underestimate the power of patience. Life will present challenges, betrayals, and moments of intense emotional strain, but the way you navigate them defines your strength. Acting with calm, insight, and deliberate timing ensures that truth and justice prevail, and it protects the relationships and values that matter most. In the quiet aftermath, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. The tension had lifted, the betrayal had been addressed, and the family's integrity had been preserved. Through observation, patience, and careful strategy, justice had been served in a way that was fair, decisive, and emotionally resonant. This was more than a victory. It was a reaffirmation of the values that define family, loyalty, and personal integrity, lessons I would carry forward for the rest of my life. As the days passed after the will reading, I found myself reflecting deeply on everything that had transpired. The whirlwind of tension, observation, and strategic planning now gave way to a calmer perspective. I realized that the most significant victory wasn't the exposure of my stepmom's scheme or the preservation of the inheritance. It was the clarity I had gained about human behavior, family loyalty, and the power of patience. I thought about the moments when I had felt frustration, anger, or fear. In the midst of those emotions, it was easy to imagine acting impulsively, to confront, to lash out, or to challenge her directly. But I had learned that true strength lies in composure, in watching and understanding, in waiting for the right moment when truth can be revealed unmistakably. That lesson, I knew, extended far beyond family disputes or inheritance drama. It applied to any challenge life might place in front of me. Looking back, I saw the subtle details I had once overlooked: the small slips of her expression, the hidden intentions behind casual remarks, the patterns of manipulation. Each had been a signal, a clue, a breadcrumb leading to the larger truth, and each one had reinforced the importance of awareness, careful observation, and thoughtful reflection. These skills, I realized, were just as valuable as any wealth or asset in life. I also reflected on the role of trust and loyalty. My father's unwavering faith in his family, his reliance on me, and the values he had instilled shaped every decision I made. Protecting him and preserving the integrity of our family legacy wasn't just a matter of strategy. It was an act of love and respect. That emotional grounding gave me purpose and clarity throughout the ordeal, reminding me that the most important victories are those that honor integrity and relationships rather than just material gain. Sharing this story now, I hope to leave the audience with more than just suspense or drama. Life is full of unexpected challenges, betrayals, and moments where people we trust may try to manipulate or deceive us. But there are universal truths that can guide us through those moments. Observe carefully, act patiently, and always remain grounded in your values. The way we respond to deception and conflict defines our character and shapes the relationships that matter most. I want to remind everyone watching that patience is not weakness. It is power. Observation is not suspicion. It is clarity, and timing, when combined with insight and integrity, becomes an unstoppable force. There were moments when it would have been easy to react impulsively, to expose her too early, to allow anger to cloud judgment, but restraint, guided by knowledge and careful planning, ensured that the outcome was both fair and impactful. As I speak directly to you, my audience, I urge you to think about the relationships in your life. Are there situations where someone's intentions are not as they appear? Are there moments where observation, patience, and strategic action could protect what is important to you? Life will test us, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, but the principles of careful attention, integrity, and timely action can help us navigate even the most complex challenges. I also want to leave you with a moral that goes beyond revenge or confrontation. Justice isn't about retaliation. It's about restoring balance, honoring truth, and preserving what is rightfully ours while maintaining integrity. In every family, in every relationship, there will be trials. How we respond to those trials with patience, insight, and composure can define not only the outcome, but also who we become in the process. Finally, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey, for witnessing a story of patience, strategy, and emotional resilience. Every betrayal, every challenge, every moment of tension carries with it a lesson, and I hope that by sharing my experience, you've gained insight, inspiration, and a deeper understanding of human behavior and family dynamics. Remember, life is rarely simple, and people are rarely straightforward, but with awareness, patience, and integrity, we can navigate even the most complicated situations, protect what matters most, and ensure that justice and truth prevail. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you insight, inspiration, or a lesson you can apply in your own life, I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that explore family, loyalty, and unexpected twists of fate. Share your thoughts, share your experiences, and remember that every challenge carries the opportunity for clarity, growth, and resolution. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this journey. And remember, patience, observation, and integrity are the greatest tools we have in facing life's most difficult challenges.